Hey everyone! I was really in the mood to make some Halloween-inspired baked goodies and came across this recipe for these double chocolate Kit Kat cookies by Cloudy Kitchen. So the first thing that you'll do is line a couple of baking sheets using parchment paper. I ended up using more than 2 baking sheets, but I just kind of rotated them as I went, so do whatever works for you. Okay, so the next step is to weigh out your dry ingredients. So I actually didn't own a baking scale until I started making sourdough during lockdown and in the early days of the pandemic, and it's actually a giant game changer. If you prefer to bake using cup measurements, this recipe actually does have those listed, and I'll put a link to the recipe in the description bar below. But if you follow the recipe creator on Instagram, you'll soon find out that she is a huge proponent of weighing out your ingredients, and she's written a really informative and solid blog post about that topic, so I'll also put a link to that down below. Anyway, for this recipe, you're going to weigh out 200 grams of all-purpose flour, as well as 80 grams of baking cocoa. I had just a tiny amount left in multiple containers of cocoa, so you'll see I ended up using 3 different types, but you definitely do not have to do this. Just measure out 80 grams and you should be all set. So then I just used a fine mesh sieve to sift that baking cocoa into my already sifted flour to make sure there's not any big clumps of anything. Okay, so now that we've weighed out our dry ingredients, we're also going to need 250 grams of unsalted butter, 200 grams of granulated sugar, 120 grams of light brown sugar, along with 1 egg and 1 egg yolk. We're also going to need a teaspoon of vanilla extract, along with a teaspoon of kosher salt. We'll also use half a teaspoon of baking powder, along with half a teaspoon of baking soda. I just measured these into the same bowl because we add them at the same step in the recipe, so it doesn't matter too much. We'll also need 150 grams of chocolate chips. You'll see in a little bit that I actually combined a number of different types here. And of course, the star of the show, you're going to need 300 grams of Kit Kats, or about 21 snack-size pieces. Okay, so the next step here is going to be to cream together our butter as well as our 2 types of sugar. I used my stand mixer here, but if you just have a hand mixer, that would also work totally fine. I started my mixer on a pretty low speed just to get things combined, and then I turned it up and left it on for about 2 to 3 minutes until our mixture got pretty light and fluffy. So after a couple of minutes, I just used a spatula to scrape down the sides, and I let it combine just for a little bit longer to make sure everything was really creamed together. So our next step is to add the egg yolk, and vanilla extract. And then you're just going to mix to combine. I try hard to not overwork my egg at this stage. So our next step is to add all of our dry ingredients to the bowl of our mixer. And then you want to mix until they're just combined. Your dough's going to feel a little bit dry here, but you definitely don't want to overmix at this stage. Okay, so now it's time to add our mix-ins into our cookie dough. So I started by counting out my 21 Kit Kats, and then I chopped each of them into pretty rough pieces. Now these do not have to be perfect. In fact, it's probably even better to have a variety of sizes and shapes that you'll incorporate into your cookies. I feel like this is just so satisfying to watch, and it was definitely satisfying to cut all of these into little pieces. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I ended up using a number of different types of chocolate chips. The first is actually a sea salt caramel chip from Trader Joe's, and then a mini chocolate chip and a regular size semi-sweet chocolate chip. But you can use whatever you have on hand as long as you've got 150 grams. Okay, so then you're just gonna dump your chocolate chips and your chopped up Kit Kats into your cookie dough, and then mix a few times using a rubber spatula just to make sure that everything's pretty evenly incorporated. You'll see the dough is pretty stiff, but this is what it should look like. Okay, so now that your cookie dough is all good to go, you're just gonna use an ice cream scoop to scoop out your balls of dough onto your prepared baking sheets. These are gonna spread a decent amount, so I would err on the side of caution and just put fewer onto each baking sheet than you think. So I only did 4 on these little sheets here. Okay, so this next step isn't entirely required, but I think it's really fun, and that's just to add a few extra little chopped Kit Kats onto the top of each cookie. You'll see they look super nice when they come out of the oven. Then you're just gonna bake them in your oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 180 degrees Celsius. The recipe calls for 16 to 17 minutes in the oven, but I found that maybe 13 to 14 worked better. Okay, so something that Erin from Cloudy Kitchen does that I just find so satisfying is something called scooting your cookies, and it's basically to make each cookie as perfectly round as you possibly can. And she uses different cookie cutters, different size cookie cutters for different size cookies, but you can use whatever you have on hand. So for example, I just had this little IKEA bowl that worked really well for me, and I think that the end result is really great. So I just finished these off using a little bit of flaky sea salt, and here we go. This is the final product. They were so delicious, and aren't they such beautiful cookies? Like, I think they turned out looking really, really great. So if you end up making these cookies, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. I also totally recommend that you go follow the original recipe creator, whose name is Erin, at Cloudy Kitchen on Instagram. I'll put a link to her account below. Her stuff is so great and so beautiful and so satisfying, so definitely go check her out. I hope you enjoyed making these cookies with me, and I actually have some more Halloween-inspired cookie videos coming up. So be sure to subscribe and keep an eye out for those coming soon.